Hello, Facebook friends. Marianne here. I just wanted to give you guys a shout out after getting the amazing opportunity to MC Aspen's very first Native American Film Festival, which was called the Shining Mountain Film Festival. I guarantee you it is not the last time we have heard about this film festival. The immense beauty behind the films was just breathtaking to me. Some are very artistic and kind of romanticized in terms of the deep spiritual traditions, but each one had a deep and poignant message at its core. And many messages are things that we all need, regardless of what race or culture we come from. We can definitely relate. And my hat's off to Diane Kessler, who did a remarkable job in curating these films so that they started off in more short story form, artistic, spiritual, and slowly made its way toward the human rights issues that Native Americans have faced, as well as indigenous people all over the world. But these films really drove it home, just so many big concerns. Among them was something called Whitewashed, and I really hope to bring this movie to Dallas sometime for a Memnosyne movie night. It really honed in on some of the awful things that we have heard, in terms of the mostly kind of baby boomer age people who at the time were young children forcibly taken away from their homes, made to go to orphanages in which many of them were abused physically, sexually, and certainly mentally. And the immense kind of psychological damage that was done when they were ripped away from their families against the will of their parents and certainly against the will of them as children, and how it affected entire generations of people. It really went into not only the people's feelings, but it had sociologists and psychologists weighing in on what happens to a people when families are split apart. And then it also went in, of course, into things such as Standing Rock and how Standing Rock makes us think about other atrocities that have occurred in our nation with Native Americans in past centuries. And not only that, it moved into some beautiful films that were actually much more storytelling in content. And I really recommend you to see some of those, and I will list them below later. But anyway, one of the main reasons why I wanted to talk to you about this was both about hope and about frustration. At the end of the film festival, there was a man who stood up on the balcony and he said, "Okay, great, I've seen this. Now, what do you want me to do about it? What do I do about it, huh? What do I do about it?" And I understand that. It is hard to look at history and realize that your ancestors may have made some really bad decisions. In fact, every single one of us, if we look back at the history of our ancestors, most likely we had some violent ancestors, every single one of us along the way. But the truth is that we have to look at our history in order to learn from it and not repeat it. And I'm going to repeat that again. We have to look at our history in order to learn from it and not repeat it. We say his story. In truth, it's our story as a nation, which we're writing every single day. And when we start looking at things such as when Native Americans were separated, and they could have been Choctaw, Cherokee, Apache, Iroquois, Navajo, Hopi, Lakota, and all these different Native Americans who were ripped apart in families, and we see the damage it did. And that damage has now been reported by scientists who are reputable, peer-reviewed journals have analyzed it. We've seen this with the First Nations people up in Canada. We've seen it with Native Americans in the United States, and we've seen it with the Indio in Latin America. So this has been proven again and again how hard this is. And people say how horrific it was, and what were our ancestors thinking to do something so horrible? And yet, in the same breath, they don't think about the Zapoteca, the Azteca, the Inca, the Maya, all these Native Americans who are being ripped apart right now on our border. And I know you guys are sick of me saying this, but until the day those little children are let out of cages, I am not going to shut up, because it would be so easy for someone like me to be in their position. Yes, their parents broke the law, many of them not realizing it. They came here because of incredible dire straits that most of us can't even fathom. Situations in Honduras, situations in Venezuela, situations where, due to the drug trafficking, sex trafficking, due to the gangs and all sorts of other situations, if they don't want to be violent like the gangs demand that they do, they have to leave. If they want to feed their children, they have to leave. If they want to have a chance at a better life, they have to leave, because they're basically trying to escape violence and a lack of opportunity. They are in every single way a struggling survivor trying to make it to the next day. And you know what? Here in the United States of America, most of us come from stories like that. We either were Native Americans whose families fought through the oppression of the invaders and made it, or we are the people who were escaping the oppression back in Europe and came here to survive. Either way, we were people who are the descendants of those who made it through oppression. So you would think that as a nation full of the descendants of survivors, or many of us who are survivors in and of ourselves, how can we lack the empathy? So much to the fact that we are okay right now with children being ripped apart from their parents. And not only that, how can we be okay right now with some of those children legally, in our government's eyes, legally being allowed to be adopted without their parents' consent and not even with their parent being informed, while their parents are kept in prison or their parent is sent outside of our country, not knowing when they will ever see their child again? Well, if you watch the movie Whitewashed, you will end up seeing how all of these psychological effects are absolutely verified. Unequivocally, you cannot doubt it. It is shown, proven, that when you rip a child away from the parent, it causes unbelievable damage to both parent and child, but especially to the child. Our nation is going to have to deal with a huge amount of guilt and future generations, as those children one day are the ones telling the stories, just like the elders I heard doing the Aspen Native American Film Festival and the movie Whitewashed, as well as many other movies, as well as in face-to-face listening to the stories of the people that I was privileged to spend time with. So we may want to think about, as we talk about Indigenous Peoples Day and about what our country did and the rights and wrongs, and there are all sorts of stories. But it makes no difference if we don't learn from that and change our ways. And right now, there's even another thing that's happened. I don't know how many of you have been listening to it, but North Dakota has a very large population of Native Americans. And because we have forced them onto reservation land a long time ago, they don't necessarily have the roads that all the other places in America have. Many reservations, in fact, are lucky to have any kind of roads at all. They live in very much third world circumstances. I could go on and tell you exactly what the plight is of many of these places. They're dealing with something called gentle genocide, which is because all of these treaties that we made with them were done before the days of potato chips and Snickers bars and soft drinks. So no one ever thought that they needed to write into the treaties if we agreed to live on land that we cannot farm because it's unfarmable, and we agreed to live on land that we cannot hunt because the animals are no longer here, that in return the United States will provide us with food. No one ever thought that they should write with nutritious food. So right now, our government tends to give them all sorts of basically crap. And that's why it's called gentle genocide, because they don't get nutritional food in those situations and they end up with diabetes, which is a very, very cruel and almost deliberate thing that is done due to what they're limited to. We see similar things in what we call food deserts throughout urban America, where people like in Dallas's Joppa community don't have access to a place to buy healthy food. So these are things that are really going on in our country right now, and we need to take a hard, long look at. And yet, when you look up at North Dakota, for example, this place where these Native Americans are struggling to live out their lives as best they can, and they're just managing to try and maintain a decent way of life. The last thing that they're going to need their money for is to put in a road that's comparable to what you and I are mainly blessed to have in an urban area. Therefore, they don't necessarily have addresses. They don't necessarily have zip codes. This is largely due to the lack of funds that they've been supplied when the rest of the United States got its beautiful road system. So, what did North Dakota do? North Dakota said, from now on, we are not going to allow anyone to vote who does not have an address that is based on this kind of road system. That means whereas you could ship a package of candy or ship a beautiful gift or whatever you want to your Lakota friend or to a Native American friend living on a reservation in North Dakota, yeah, they don't have any problem getting that. Unfortunately, because their system does not rely on the same system as the rest of our nation, in which they would need to have hundreds of thousands of dollars to put in the kind of road system that the rest of us have, which they do not have access to, because they do not have that, they will be denied the right to vote. Now, thankfully, a lot of Native Americans fought this because they realized that this would limit all the people living on a reservation from being allowed to vote. So they took it up to the state court. They kept going further and further up. The state kept fighting back, and it kept going, kept going, kept going. And now, thanks to Kavanaugh, it was ruled that the Supreme Court will not even listen to it, which means that now there's a threat, thanks to Kavanaugh, that these Native American populations living on reservations up in North Dakota may not even have a chance to vote. And it makes me wonder, who are we as citizens of the United States of America, who are not even descended from those who were the original inhabitants of this land, to say they do not have a say in the government over the land in which they were the first Americans to reside? Who are we to even think that we could say such a thing to them like that? Now, I know it wasn't until 1976 that a lot of Native Americans were allowed to vote. So this is fairly recent that we were able to grow past this racism. So let's not go backwards. When I started looking at a lot of the films, it made me think about the stories that I've heard from many of my close friends. And it was really an honor to have Gregory Gomez there, an Apache elder and spiritual leader who has been one of my closest spirit brothers, who's walked with me since the beginning of the Memnosyne Institute and has continued his work with me over here in Aspen. I also want to give a call out to Louie, Hena, who was also instrumental, and of course a very special call out to two people who could not be with us, and that is Loya K. Arrum and Buchanan. They spent many years of their lives helping us to change things here in the Aspen Valley. You know, when I was a little kid coming up here to Aspen, I was often the only non-white person that was on the mountain. And people didn't look at me in a mean way, but it was kind of this double take, like, what's that? What's who? Who? What? She's there? And, you know, over time, that doesn't happen as much. But, you know, so I've seen the difference. I've seen the difference between when stores used to take second looks at me to when no one thinks twice about me. So America, we've changed. We've grown up. We've become more inclusive and less bigoted. And that's a very, very good thing. And I'm deeply touched by the current mayor, Mark. I'm deeply touched by the past mayors who've all played a part of this. Deeply touched by Jody and Tom Cardamone, who have really been a part of everything that we did here. And the Aspen Historical Society, who innovated a new way to tell history, where you have the archaeologists and historians telling history on one side of the timeline and the Native Americans telling the same story on the other side of the timeline, so that people can begin to understand each other better. I was really, really touched by Roland, who is a Ute elder who also came, and the two of us had been working for many of the same goals over the years without ever having met each other. So that was a privilege as well. But the point being that I saw Aspen grow from a place that did have a bit of racism left over to where it is much, much better today. And a place where, when it used to be pulling teeth to get people to change the plaques to recognize that the Ute were the first people living in the valley as opposed to the miners, now people just openly accept that. That's what's taught in the schools. People are fascinated by the Ute. They want to encourage them. They want to reconnect with them. And the fact that we have seen that kind of change over time go from where it was really pushing against the grain to try and make this happen to where we had a full house in the theater there at the Real Opera House, where people came from all over the valley because they wanted to learn more. And then people lingered because they wanted to meet the Native Americans. And they wanted to check on their understandings of history and hear how the local Native Americans thought of history. And I started seeing reconciliation happen. And there's even talk of some further steps being done. And I just really, really want to share that story with you because it's a story of progress. While we see a lot of bad stuff on the news, it can be really depressing. And I guarantee you, I get just as depressed as the rest of you. It's really hard. Believe me, I'm not looking forward to going back to Texas and carrying my papers again in case a cop comes up to me and says, "Papers, please." Trust me, I don't like that. But the point is that despite how that can feel like 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, the truth is that what I've experienced here in the Aspen Valley shows me that progress can be made. And if it can be made here, where you have a whole lot of 1%, you have a whole lot of Republicans, you have a whole lot of people that like things just the way they are, and now they want reconciliation, they want to be able to reconnect, and they see how their own lives and their communities' lives are better for it, that tells me that the rest of America can also do the same thing. So while we're taking a look at what North Dakota is doing and attempting to essentially limit the opportunity for Native Americans to take their rightful place as voters, because how could you be any more legitimate an American citizen than being an indigenous Native American? Go figure. But since Kavanaugh has blocked their opportunity for that right now, and hopefully they are not going to give up that fight, it's up to the rest of us to speak out about that. It's up to the rest of us to speak out about families being torn apart at the border and children being given for adoption without the consent of the parent or even the parent being informed. These are practices that the United States used to do a long time ago. Let's not go back to that. And there are other things that we need to pay attention to. While everybody has been focusing on Kavanaugh, many people haven't noticed how there is real discussion about limiting Chinese people from being able to come and attend our universities, and how they were starting to say, would that also extend to Chinese Americans? Because how would we know whether they are spies? That sounds a little too close to the times of the Japanese internment camps. And back then, we didn't have a German internment camp, but we certainly had Japanese internment camps during World War II. So let's be honest with ourselves about how these decisions are made. And let's say, no, we don't like the fact that our Senate even thought about trying to pass a law limiting a particular group of people from being able to attend university. Now, I understand that the whole point behind that was the idea of two things. One, their fear from our government was, how do we know a Chinese isn't a spy? If they're the third generation or they've been here since the 1800s, chances are they're Americans first. Chances are many of them don't even speak Chinese. But if we take a look at what they're talking about with Chinese students coming in from out of the country and attending our Ivy League schools, maybe people don't realize that the way our scholarships are provided for the poor to Ivy League schools is because people from outside the country have to pay full price. And that money then gets converted into scholarships for the people that would normally not be able to pay, but who have every ounce of intelligence deserving of an Ivy League education. So if we want our own people to be able to afford going to the best colleges possible when they have the brain to do so, but they don't have the wallet to do so, then believe me, you want foreign students paying full price, because that's how your family or your neighbor's family are going to be able to get into those Ivy League schools when they don't necessarily have it in the bank to do so. So, we need to take a look at this. And I also want to call us all out on how I keep hearing things. People are talking about Catholics are doing all this stuff. Jews are all this stuff. Gays are all that stuff. Muslims are all this stuff. Mexicans are all that. Let's get over it. Each one of us is a part of this grand nation, this experiment. And like I said when I was emceeing the Aspen's first Native American Film Festival, the Shining Mountain Film Festival, when we take a look at what our founding fathers were talking about, Thomas Jefferson said it was his greatest hope that one day our founding fathers would look back, their descendants of our founding fathers, that means all of us, would look back upon them and believe their beliefs to be antiquated. And we do. We don't have slaves like Thomas Jefferson had. We don't disallow women to vote. Martha Washington protested about that and she was ignored. It took a long time for us to get here. It took a long time for even others of us, like Native Americans, to gain the vote. So let's really take a hard look at this and see what it took to get here, and decide consciously that we refuse to embrace those xenophobic, those bigoted ideas that are rooted in fear, and stop looking at each other because we have different races or backgrounds or cultures or religions as somebody that we can depersonify. We can't remove the humanity out of somebody else that's the same species. If we do that, we're actually removing our own humanity from our hearts. And each time that happens, our country begins to die a little bit. So don't let that happen. Keep your heart open. Keep the empathy going so that you can understand your fellow neighbor and learn from history so that we do our role in not repeating it. Let's wipe clean the blood that has been spilt by looking at similar situations today and saying, we will not do that. We will not be the cause of a whole generation of Native Americans having PTSD because they were ripped apart from their families. Yes, thousands of children are already dealing with that right now, but every one of us can speak up against it. Yes, we can be the generation that says, no, we will not be part of denying an entire group of people the right to vote, like what is happening up in North Dakota. All of us can speak out about that. And we can choose to not be privy to being part of something horrible like what happened with the Japanese internment camps, were based on race and culture. People suspected of possibly being a spy. They did that with the Japanese in the internment camps in World War II. Let's not do that with the Chinese right now. Besides, you know what's going to happen? Same thing that happened after Trump said when McCain passed away, well, I want ICE to start looking at the Vietnamese closer now. How many people can tell one type of Asian from another type of Asian? Mostly Asians know how to do that. So if you're not Asian, what's going to stop that person from stopping the next Asiatic-looking person or Athabascan Native American who has Asiatic features on the street asking for papers, please? Same way I'm asked for papers, please. Same way someone from India is asked. Same way someone from the Middle East is asked. Same way someone from any Latin American country or Native American reservation is asked, because we all have this kind of look. Every one of us thinks, well, it's not happening to me, so it's not that big a deal. And I see some of you posting, well, Trump seems to be working out fine. Talk to your neighbor who doesn't look like you, who doesn't have the same religious belief as you do. And if you don't hear something that makes you pause in your tracks about how their life is currently being changed and how their human rights are being threatened, or how the level of hate that they're getting because of who they are, for being Jewish, for being Catholic, for being gay, for being a Muslim, for whatever it is they might be, then you probably don't have many people in terms of a variety. I suggest to get out there, out of your comfort zone, and meet someone new, talk to someone new. I do that with people as well. I have a number of friends who are extremely conservative, who disagree vehemently with me. And by sitting down and trying to understand what their fears are, it helps me better understand where they're coming from, to be empathetic to who they are, so that I can understand that there are issues within Caucasian America and small rural areas where they need an influx of capital to help them start their businesses, where they need an opportunity to be able to get into universities which they can't normally get into because they don't fit into the minority criteria that's so often demanded by universities. I hear their pain. I don't say I have the answers, but I understand that up to now, there has not been an investment in their needs. And yet, when I talk to some of them who are being pulled into the alt-right because they're saying you can be proud about who you are and everyone else says that you can't be, the first thing I like to point out to them is, guess what? I've never heard of a Ku Klux Klan scholarship for the poor white kid. I've never heard of a Ku Klux Klan investment fund to help start up small businesses for white people who are in need. Let's take a look. You will see Irish immigrants reaching out. You'll see funds set up by Jewish immigrants. You'll see funds set up by Italian immigrants. But you won't see a KK one. You won't see an alt-white run. The point being, as we start looking at our culture, when people don't feel their needs are being answered in one place, they're going to listen to whoever seems to be listening to them. And right now, as long as those of us who have a long history of being hurt don't pause to listen and understand why they feel like Trump and the entire GOP, who's been trying to promote a whole lot of hatred toward those of us who do not fit the straight, white, male, Protestant demographic of the 1%, then they're going to say, okay, let me go where I'm wanted. Let me go where someone's paying attention to me. Well, the one thing that we minorities can do is we can listen to them. One thing that those of you who are in that 1% can do is to listen to minorities. One thing that every single one of us can do is to do our best to make ourselves a human being to the person next to us, so that we don't become just another demographic. So when I say to you that a whole bunch of Native Americans up in North Dakota may be denied the right to vote, you're thinking, well, that's up there somewhere. That has nothing to do with me. But then maybe you know a friend who has a percentage of Cherokee in them. Maybe your own family has some Choctaw. Maybe your great-grandfather was Apache, or you had a friend of yours who you believe to be Hispanic, which means that, guess what? If they look like me, they're probably about 90% Native American. And if you have any of that in your life, and you love that person, would you want them to be denied the right to vote? Probably not, because most of us are good, decent people. So if you do feel compassion enough where that would disturb you, then try and imagine hundreds of people just like that up in North Dakota being denied the right to vote right now because of a flippant decision that was just made by the Supreme Court, thanks to Kavanaugh. So I'm just asking all of you to try and pay a little closer attention to what's going on in the world around us and learn from our history. It's okay to look at history and to condemn it when we've done something bad, but unless we're willing to learn from it and change how we do our actions today, then we are no better than our ancestors who made those inhumane mistakes. In fact, we'll be worse because we had them to learn from. So those are my 2 cents. I love you all, and I know that so many exciting things are coming down the pike, and I can't wait to share more exciting things with you. I'm extremely honored that SHE, a conference that's occurring over in Amsterdam on the 20th, there are Latin American, Hispanic, American, as well as Latin women and Hispanic women all over the globe, from Europe, from Asia, from, of course, Latin America, from North America. And yes, there are Latin American women that are all over other places outside the Americas. But I was so touched that they voted to give me an honoring for my work with human rights. And I want you all to know, every one of you who shows up when I ask you to show up and march beside me, or who has donated, who helps the Memnosyne Institute in any way, or who champions me when I stand up for LGBT rights, for women's rights, for the rights of any minority, for the rights of people to practice their religion in peace, for any of these issues. Any of you that have fought with me for people with disabilities, any of you that have ever stood with me or just posted an encouraging comment for this work, this award is due because of you. You continue to inspire me. You continue to make that difference. And as long as you take whatever you get from anything I share with you, such as this particular video or whatever I'm doing, and you take ownership of it and make it part of who you are, interpret it in your own way, and stand up and speak out when someone tries to shut down somebody next to you, as long as you stand up for someone's human rights when they are completely different from you, and maybe they even believe differently than you, passionately differently than you, politically, spiritually, socially, but you stand up for their rights because you understand that something that is a threat against their human rights is a threat against your own. As long as you're doing that, then you are part of the solution. I know that our world is so difficult right now. So many of us get depressed, and believe me, I do too. But take a look at what happened here in Aspen. It's changed. It's continuing to evolve. And that is during this current socio-political time. If we can have change here, we can have change in your backyard too. And that's exciting. And all of us have the opportunity to be part of that. And what is more exciting than looking at a big challenge in the face and saying, I am going to choose to help lead the change, to be the change, to breathe the change, to know with every step I take and choice I make that I am making that change in the world. Because I am consciously, if it's a matter of going to Walmart or Target, I'm going to choose Target because I don't want to support slavery by going to Walmart. That's a difference you made. If it's a matter of, standing up for somebody in line who is being ignored or given a hard time, that makes a difference. I know it may not feel like it, but right now our world is so full of hate and vitriol that if you can speak truth and light and beauty and love to the next person, especially if it's someone you disagree and dislike, then you are part of the change in this world. So thank you all, because every one of you who has walked this walk with me this many years are part of the reason why I'm receiving this Human Rights Award by the SHE Conference in Amsterdam. I'm incredibly humbled and shocked. I was not expecting this. Many thanks to Viola, who I guess nominated me, and many thanks to all the women at SHE who voted for me, and many thanks to all those in the Memnosyne Institute who have walked with me. And I know it's sometimes been very challenging, but all of you have made a difference. Isabel, Todd, Philip, Anthony, Alan, Wendell, and of course everybody on the Memnosyne board, Thomas, everybody on our advisory board like Don Beck, Barbara Marks Hubbard, so many others, Lawrence, so many of you have made that difference. And to my closest spirit family, especially my spirit sisters, Gina Grant, Tanya Rodriguez, Quinn Charlestone, Marva Hanks. It takes women warriors like you to help me sometimes when I am just feeling rolled over. And to all of the strong, beautiful male warriors as well, I thank you all for taking this walk with me. This is a hard time, but together we will change it. Together we will triumph, and together we will help reshape this world. But it's going to take our belief in each other and our support of each other and our determination not to let each other's voice be killed by the winds that blow in the opposite direction. For when one of us is shut down, for the other to stand up. When one of us is silenced, for the other to shout out. It will take all of us with that kind of determination to continue moving forward against the tide of these times, because when we take a stand, we are doing nothing less than refusing to let history repeat itself. Instead, we are choosing to make history consciously and with a sense of the full responsibility of what it means to be an American. My love to you all, and talk to you soon.